Hey, good evening and welcome to another in the Total Transformation series. Our subject tonight is one that many of us have experienced, especially during the last 14 months, namely that of grief. Now, the loss of a loved one causes much pain, possibly emotionally, psychologically, and even physically. And our presenter this evening is Leebert Hughes, who is a life coach, and our moderator is Pastor Julian Castrati. And during the seminar, if there are any questions that come to mind or any comments that you'd like to make, please place them in the chat. And our presenter and moderator will have a look at them, and I'm sure they'll answer them to the best of their ability. So please take note of what's being said. And we're asking also that if you have any family or friends who have not tuned in as yet, it's still not too late to invite them to join us for this evening's seminar. So I'll hand over now to Pastor Julian as we begin tonight's session.
Good evening from me as well. I want to say hi from Didsbury. I understand my better half has beaten me to this transformation seminar. She has already presented, and I was present during that evening. And what a blessing this is, you know, after the very successful series 1 last year, to the second part now this year. I want to show my appreciation and the compliments to all of you, to you, Elder and Pastor Daniel, and the whole team, and of course all the presenters. It's a privilege to be a part of this and such an important topic. You know, grief is a short word, you know, but there is so much into it. It might be just 4 to 5 letters, but it's such an important subject. It's such a sensitive subject, but yet very relevant, as you rightly pointed out. And I look forward, of course, to chatting with our special guest, our speaker, and of course to interacting with our esteemed friends that are watching us on Zoom. I understand this is also streamed live on YouTube, and that is excellent. Now, we think of grief, but basically a simple definition could be that it's a human response to loss. You know, from this perspective, I guess all changes, even positive changes, they produce some sort of a loss, which results in a grief reaction. So one could argue that change and loss and grief are very much, you know, there, and that's in the same height. But however one defines grief, the therapeutic goals that it calls for are to help us accept that reality of the loss and experience its pain, to adjust to our environment, to reconstruct life, and of course, ultimately to reinvest in living again. But of course, we're gonna listen more in detail shortly. How we respond dealing with grief, that is the title of our subject tonight. We respond very differently, of course, and so without further ado, I want to again welcome our special guest, Mr. Leebert Hughes. Is a family life coach from the Greater Manchester area. Welcome. I'll address you as Leebert. You can call me Julian.
Okay, that's fine.
Welcome. We look forward to you sharing with us on your presentation. Of course, I will be thinking from my pastoral experience over the years, and especially recently, you know, which has been a very, very, very difficult year for all of us, and yet it's been an opportunity as well to serve and to learn more about grief. And so this is a very important topic. So I hand it over to you, Leebert. Welcome again.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for thanks for the opportunity to do this. As you rightly said, grief is only a small word, but it has big connotations. it's a wide subject. And so tonight, what I'm wanting to do is talk about the experiential side of grief. So we may look at the impact, the cognitive impact that grief has, the emotional, physical, behavioral, and spiritual impact of grief. And then we'll see how we go from there. All right. Just share my screen. Okay. I'm going to introduce 3 friends to you that will travel with you on your journey through grief. Right, so we're looking at grief and loss because we don't only grieve for a person that may have died. We grieve for anything that's important to us that we may have lost. All right, so grief and loss. And these 3 friends are going to be with you on your journey through your grieving journey. And so we start with grief. Let me just get this picture on there so I can see. Okay. All right. So we know that grief is our internal emotions. Grief is a common and normal physiological response following the death or loss. Grief includes the entire emotional process of coping with loss, and it can last a long time. So grief is what you feel, all right? Grief is what you feel. His companion is mourning. So mourning is the external expression of loss. So mourning is best defined as an act of outward expression of grief. Mourning often goes along with grief, while grief is a personal experience and process. Mourning is how grief and loss are shown in public. So mourning is what you do. Mourning is what you do. And the last one is bereavement, right? So grief and mourning happens during a period of time called bereavement. Bereavement refers to the time when a person experiences sadness after losing a loved one. So bereavement is what happens to you. These 3 guys are going to track you on your journey through your grief. Okay, so we are currently facing tragic loss of life. Often under very challenging circumstances, we are adapting to a new way of living, and often surrounded by fear, anxiety, and sickness. Coping with loss during this unprecedented time can be extremely difficult. And I've spent some time looking at grief from COVID perspective, okay? Although what I'm saying to you happens generally, in grief generally, but may be impacted differently in terms of COVID. So grief at any time is difficult and painful. And even under normal circumstances, the death of a loved one can be challenging and represent a significant loss. While you will experience all of the normal pain of loss and separation, death during COVID-19 pandemic may present additional challenges to the grieving process. So just putting this in that context, some new challenges to grieving the death of a loved one may be related to restrictions arising from social distancing. For example, you may be unable to attend their wake, funeral, or memorial service in traditional ways. You may have limited physical contact with your family, friends, others who may have otherwise provided invaluable support. This may lead to further feelings of isolation and loneliness. You may be living in isolation with others who cause tension and resentment. You may have, you may be thinking you have more time, you have more time to think because of limited access to others and hobbies. With my cursor. All right. All right. I've just seemed to have missed a couple out. Okay, here we go. You may be experiencing intense feeling of worry about the current situation in the world. This may distract you from fully experiencing the process of your grief. High levels of uncertainty and instability about this current situation, making future planning more difficult. It is important to remember that grief and reaction to loss are deeply personal, a deeply personal experience, which are influenced by your experience, your personality, your personal belief, and the relationship that you have with that person. And that's why grief is unique to each person. All right, we don't all grieve in the same way. It is important to remember that grief is a normal, and you'll probably find phrases that are repeated as I go through this. That is deliberate. Repetitions mean that we remember it. Okay, so it is our natural way of healing. When we think about grief, we don't often think about the fact that of healing. So nevertheless, grief can be incredibly demanding, and you may be surprised at the different ways it can affect you and the impact it can have, particularly during this current crisis. I like the way that Earl Gottman put this. It says, grief is not a disease. Sorry, grief is not a disorder, a disease, or signs of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. The price you pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve. I like the way how he put that so succinctly. So we know that grief is unique, and we grieve in a personal way. However, some of the common impacts of loss may include, and so we're looking at the cognitive impact of grief in our lives. So there may be disbelief, there may be difficulties with concentrating, denial, difficulty making decision, confusion, making mistakes, more mistakes than you usually would do, thinking it's not fair, finding it's difficult to get back on track. All right, so these are some of the things that you, from a cognitive perspective, that you may go through. That's not suggesting that you will go through all of them, right? But there's a possibility that you may hit one or quite a few of these in your experience. So looking at shock, numbness, or disbelief can be common, especially immediately afterwards, when people often report difficulty accepting or believing what has happened. This may be especially true during COVID-19 pandemic, when you may not have the opportunity to see your loved one at the time of death or afterwards. So the busyness of trying to sort things out in the present environment may allow some of the doubt, disbelief to continue for longer than usual. This means that the reality of the loss may not be experienced until a more normal living routine returns. Alternatively, if you are self-isolating or less busy in your daily routines, you may feel more overwhelmed by your feelings. Okay, and then looking at the emotional impact that we may have in our journey of grief. So there may be numbness, fear, anger, guilt, emptiness, regret, sadness, loneliness, and anxiety. Okay, looking at anger, irritability, and the associated questioning, why did this have to happen? Might be exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly if related to concerns about protection and well-being. Looking at guilt may be more significant during the COVID pandemic time, with increase in feelings of survivor's guilt can understandably occur, but not become increasingly
intrusive,
instructive. Okay. Worry and fear might be more significant in relation to your own health or other family members concerning COVID-19 infection. Your own family may have heightened concerns for your well-being, and this can put additional stress on your day. So looking at the physical impact of grief in this time, or generally, and that is the physical impact that we may have. So we may experience tiredness and lack of energy, difficulties sleeping, change in appetite, aches and pains, weight loss or gain, feeling faint, a hollow feeling in your stomach, tightness in your chest or throat, oversensitivity to noise, and feeling more tense and irritated. So that's some of the physical impact of grieving. And then looking at some of the behavioral one. So that may be crying, avoiding contact with others, overeating, wanting to be around people more than usual, undereating, drinking alcohol or taking prescription drugs, preoccupation with death, or avoiding talking about it. And so the spiritual ones are questioning. We may have a million questions that we want answers to that we may not get answers to. But this is also a time when we may question God, when we may question our faith. So we are searching for meaning. You know, why has this happened at this time? What does that mean for that person and for myself? Faith may be strengthened or weakened. Okay, sometimes our faith can dip in a negative way as much as it can rise in a positive way. And then trying to make sense of all of this. Why this happened right now? What, you know, how can I make sense of this this thing that just come up on me unawares, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So grief is a normal process that requires time. It can be easy to neglect our own needs during the grieving process. The feelings above are normal and may ebb and flow as you experience the loss, adjust and adopt into your life.
Would you allow me to interject?
Certainly.
Very briefly, because you know this is so much important stuff here being shared, and we want to welcome our viewers that probably joined just a few minutes later. We've been going through different topics. Our special guest, Leebert Hughes, family life coach, has been sharing with us about grief, of course, and loss, coping with grief and loss in a new context. So that's been, and then we've been talking recently about the understanding grief. So there's a cognitive impact, emotional, physical, behavioral, and spiritual. Now, I'm very thankful, for all this, for what you're sharing with us. I'm learning new things myself. I was, you were sharing, and I was thinking about my experiences. Of course, my own experiences with grief, but of course, also related to my, profession as an ordained minister, where especially what I've appreciated is you have been very sensitive, and you have mentioned particularly the context of our times. And that's that COVID-19 pandemic, where everything is felt, much deeper. That includes grief. And I really wanted to show appreciation for that. Because it's right. It's right there. It's a reality that we haven't really overcome yet, but one thing I wanted to point out and to show particular appreciation, where you said, you've shared with us, people grieve differently, and we need to allow for others to grieve differently from ours. And that is something that I have to keep all the time, at the back and the front of my mind. So, and I thought that was very, very relevant, because sometimes we might be just saying the wrong thing or coming to the wrong conclusions. Anyway, sorry about that, but we look forward now to you sharing now, very importantly, about looking after ourselves after the death of a loved one, which I guess is the most extreme case of grief. Yes,
and the point about the fact is that everybody grieves in their own way. As I said at the top of this, is that our grief is unique to us, and we have to grieve in the way that we can grieve, not like we've seen somebody else grieve. But then, if we're getting the right support, we will be encouraged to do that. Just want to look at some Bible reference to give this fill out. Because if you're a Christian that's listening in, so the first we have to recognize that grief is not a normal process to pain and loss. Okay. And unless we can accept that, we tend to become stuck in our journey of grief. So we need to be able to come to this point Now, I'm not saying that you're going to come to it straight away, but at some point, you need to be able to get to this point whereby you can acknowledge the grief and accept it as a normal response. I know that when we are in pain, we want to get rid of the pain and do anything that we can to avoid it, but we need to just understand that that's the experience that we are going through. Secondly, we know the time of grief serve a purpose. What is that purpose? Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 2, which says, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of fasting.
Feasting.
For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart." The verse is implying that grief can be good because it can refresh our perspective on life, right? And so the third one then would be that we remember that feelings of grief are temporary, and that's important to hold on to sometimes. That, you know, while I'm in the midst of my pain, this is temporary. People sometimes ask me, well, how long will I this pain last? And I can't honestly give an answer. You have to work through the process. You have to go through the process. Okay. Again, I like how this guy put this, you know, but it says grief can have a quality of profound healing because we are forced to a depth of feelings that is usually below the threshold of awareness. So that brings up, it's like an iceberg. You know, we may see what's on the top, but the majority of the iceberg is underneath. And he's quite right, and it's a profound healing. And we'd oftentimes associate healing with grief, but that's exactly what happened as you follow your journey through. And then another important part of grief is to expressing it to God. If you're a Christian, it's to express your grief to God. Another important step is to, in overcoming grief, is to share it with others, trusted others, I would say. When we share our stories with God and others, our grief lessens, right? Our grief lessens. Sadly, grief is part of the human experience. Loss is part of life, and grief is a normal response to loss. But we have the hope of Christ, and we know that he is strong enough to carry our burdens. Matthew 11:30. He can give our hurt. Sorry, we can give our hurts to him because he cares for us. 1 Peter 5:7. And I will pray the Father, and he will give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever. That's reference to the Holy Spirit. So God is comforting us in our grief. Right, and then again, like this quotation, the road through grief is rocky. It's a rocky one. Traveling along it requires courage, patience, wisdom, and hope. And I want to underscore the hope bit, you know, because without hope, we can become very stuck in the place at which we are. Okay, I just want to briefly give you some pointers as you go to your journey, and then after this, I may just open for question. So be kind to yourself. Give yourself permission to feel whatever you feel. Keep regular contact with others through text, calls, video calls, emails, etc. Share your feelings. Make use of the support from the people around you, as you might find it helps to talk through how you are feeling. Try to eat well, even if you don't feel like it. Get some rest, even if you can't sleep. Try to keep a regular routine of getting up, dressed, eating meals at regular times. Try to get fresh air every day if you can. Even open a window can help. Take some gently exercise, even around the house while you do your chores. Do something creative to express your feelings. So that may be writing, painting, making a scrapbook, whatever you want to do, or play a musical instrument. All these creative things can help you to manage the journey, your journey of grief. Just continue a little bit more with that. Accept help if offered. Don't feel guilty if you are struggling. Try not to turn to quick fix that may cause additional distress. Try to avoid increased substance use, such as alcohol, medication, or drugs. You may wish to consider joining a support group either online or face-to-face. As we open up that, then all those face-to-face things will gradually come back into play. Some people like journalists are keeping a journal, keeping a personal record or diary may be helpful, a helpful way to express thoughts and experiencing. Understanding triggers to your grief and prepare for those triggers. Be patient with yourself and on others. Just skip that for now. Yeah, while I'm here, let me, oops. All right, let me deal with this and then I'll come back to that. Often we just focus on the primary loss when somebody dies. So we think of the physical person that we lose, but there are some secondary losses. So it could be that a loss of income, a loss of identity, a loss of dream for the future, loss of faith, loss of confidence, loss of financial security, loss of support system. So, and you could go on to build on that list. You could go on to build on that list that we lose, and that's why we say that when somebody loses somebody in the first 3 to 6 months, what they need is befriending and not therapy, because they're still accumulating the losses that they have through losing that person. I want to just talk you through this, and then I think I'll be done. This graph was done by Kubler-Ross. It's probably the most popular one that you'll find in the patterns of grief. And so he starts with shock, denial, anger, fear, sadness, helplessness, bargaining, understanding, acceptance, and then new status quo. Now that graph is a linear graph, right? So you won't necessarily start at shock, if you can get this cursor, at shock, and then just work your way gradually through the cycle. Now, we said earlier on that each of us grieve in different way, and our starting point on this graph would be different. So somebody may start at shock, another may start at anger, another may start with sadness, another may start with denial. So each person's process is a starting point is different. But even wherever you start, it doesn't mean that you were just continually tracking in a linear way, because you may get even to bargaining and then find yourself going back to anger, or you may get to helplessness, but you may find yourself going back to denial. Kind of reminds me a little bit about the children of Israel. So it's not a linear process that you would go through. You can go to somewhere, you do some processing, but then you may go back, but eventually you will come out at the other end of this this graph. I think I'm going to leave it there and take any further questions that there may be.
Yes, we have excellent questions coming out, but what an excellent presentation it's been, and so relevant. So thank you again for what you've been sharing. You've been telling us now in the second part about looking after ourselves, especially after the death of a loved one, overcoming grief, having the right perspective for it. And those tips, and I guess we should all take note of as many of those tips for looking after ourselves while grieving, especially in this current crisis. And then you shared, of course, a list of possible contacts for support. Now, we want to jump straight into the questions. I felt like sharing, I was reflecting again about my own experiences. I come originally from Albania, which is still very certain cultural values are very much preserved, like in the good old times. So when a person passes away, there is a strong sense of community, and I think that is very healthy. And also here, for instance, in the church, and like I said, this is a part, I think, a noble part of our ministry is to be there to minister for people that are grieving, or to conduct funeral services. My first one in England, I was there. I observed Pastor Daniel, and I will never forget that experience. He dealt so professionally, but so, with such empathy. So I was there learning myself, even though I've conducted, of course, back home. But to have in the middle of the pandemic to go through a funeral service is no easy thing. Absolutely not. But that feeling of that community that you, that sense of community that you miss, the lots of people to be there, the eating part, the tradition of eating, having a meal, all those restrictions now, not being able to even do that, especially last year, it's been quite challenging. But at the same time, let's go back to those questions. So the first question is, why do people tend to lose hope when their loved one passes away? And what may give these people hope? That's the first question.
Okay. I think there's what I would say is that there's true hope and there's false hope. People may find hope in going to somebody that will tell them about they can have contact with their lost loved one, and they may find hope in that. But when we talk about hope, we're talking about the hope that we get through our relationship with Christ. Also, I guess what's also important is that if we're supporting somebody that doesn't believe that, is that we don't just take away what they believe without replacing it with something else. All we can do is to be supportive to that person or to those people, that they can also see that the way we respond is maybe different, but also they may find comfort in that. So sometimes we are not without hope. It's whether or not we have the right hope.
That's right. No, I appreciate that. We have quite a few questions, and I think all questions are really excellent and to the point. So the next one, but we want to try to avoid to basically not to avoid any of them and to address them. They're all really good. Why can I not let go of feeling sad and melancholic? How do I control this?
Experience it.
Hmm.
What we tend to do is that we fight it. We spend a lot of time fighting feeling melancholy. When, as we've heard earlier on, that we need to be able to embrace it in order to work with it and work through it. If you're really struggling and get stuck in that point, what we would suggest is that you speak to somebody that has the skills that may help you to just move on a little from that point. Or you may speak to your GP, you may speak to your pastor, or you may speak to a friend that you know can guide you there rightly. But it is a process.
Yes. And that's very, very important to keep in mind. And the next two questions I'm going to combine in one. Also, we want to be aware of time, but I think that they are related. Basically, I think you mentioned earlier about survivor's guilt, which I think was very important. So the two questions are, the first one, if someone doesn't feel like living anymore, because of this strong, extreme grief that they're experiencing, how can we support them? And do they need professional help? And then the other question is, I often feel that it should have been me and not my partner. Mm-hmm. Why do I still feel like this 10 years on? And so, it's very sensitive and very important, to address.
Sometimes we can get stuck in our grief process. So we just keep on going around in cycles. Until we can find a way to break that cycle. So I may need to have to come to a real acceptance that, my brother or my sister or whoever it might be has died. This is how it's left me feeling. I'm feeling very low. I'm feeling very lethargic. I might feel that I don't want to continue to go on to live. And there's a lot of people that will come to that point. For the Christian, they may have some good guidance through their fellow member, or they may have good guidance through the pastoral team. For somebody that is not a Christian, unless they are sometimes seek professional help, they will continue to remain in that cycle and will not find a way out. And if they really want to harm themselves, eventually they will do that because they cannot find a way out. So sometimes we need support, we need help to break where we are, to break the cycle.
I appreciate that very much. I was thinking during the week, and you and I have been in contact, and we were preparing for tonight, and what a blessing it is to be together with our wonderful, distinguished guests. And we have a lot of them and there and participating and reflecting, I guess, upon their own experiences. But yesterday I was in a community service event in one of my churches, and we were helping some vulnerable people. And but one story stuck with me. Basically, a gentleman, he was telling about how he goes every Sunday to his father's grave. He visits there, but he doesn't do this for any superstitious reasons or anything. But he is stuck with anger. Basically, he was saying that he left my mom. He was angry at his dad, but in a very, how do I say this, he didn't mean it with malice, but he was still, so that anger, so stuck with anger. So, and we have another question. I think one of the questions is, people unfortunately get stuck, and you mentioned this, in the Kubler-Ross curve. But I remember reading some time ago that it's important to get them to talk. And I said, look, just share whatever you're feeling. Just talk, let it out. And of course, and then he knows that I'm a pastor, but then you say, well, he said, I'm a Christian, I grew up, I went to the Catholic Church. He started talking about his journey, in his youth, when he would attend the church. He was a Catholic Christian, believer. And, and I encouraged him to talk to God the way, he would talk normally, to his best friend. But I wonder if how important it is that we find the right way to address, when we others, because sometimes I think we might just be saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's good to have a sense of who you're speaking with.
Yeah.
And knowing a little bit about them, because that may help you to give the right instruction. Anger is one of the sticking points in terms of therapy, particularly when the person is angry with the person that has died. Because there is a feeling, well, how can I be angry with my dad or my mom when they have died? When you think about it, mom or dad may have been part of their stability, their foundation.
Yeah.
And then going means then that is also gone. But they may struggle to work out why am I so angry with them? And it's helping them to guide them to what is it that they have lost by losing that person? What is it that why is it that they may be angry with that person? And as you get to understand why they're angry, then you can begin to work on how you can guide them through that. And again, if they are stuck, they may need some support, professional support to do that.
Thank you so much for that. And talking about support, one of the questions here: does faith-based practice help to cope with grief better, in your experience?
It seems as if the short answer should be yes. But it's really how the person grieving apply themselves to the process. And what I mean by that is that you can, whether or not you're Christian or not, you can become stuck at any one point. Having a faith can help us because we know that whatever we're going through is for a short time. We have the promises that God has given us and that reassure us, that comforts us. But somebody without faith may not have that. But I forgot the question, sorry.
No problem. It's basically faith-based practices.
Okay.
Yeah. How do they? Okay. Yeah.
So faith-based practice, yes, should.
It should be helping us to cope with grief better.
Yeah, should be productive, but not always, because sometimes we can use cliches or texts from the Bible, and although they're coming from a good place, they are not helping. And like I said before, you got to have a sense or know who is it that you're dealing with. Remember, we said that grief is a unique journey for each person. And if you don't understand the journey that person is traveling, how can you guide them?
All right. Now our time is ticking, and I knew there was going to be a lot of questions. In the beginning we didn't have so many in the chat, and now it's like going very strongly. But they're all excellent questions. Let's try to see if we can address them, of course, properly. Again, talking about this subject, we cannot just I'm going to give you a very short answer, right? But I'm sure you as a professional will address them properly, appropriately, as you have. We talked earlier about how people grieve differently and how we need to allow for that. So here's a very, very interesting and very personal question and very heartfelt. If I do not cry for the loss of a loved one, does this mean I am heartless?
Short answer is no.
Amen.
Because in your process in your journey of grief, tears may not be where you start. So you may start probably at anger, or you may start at denial. So tears may come further down the line. And this is where I've seen grief destroyed families, because if I'm grieving, if my starting point of grieving is to, let's say, be angry, but I'm looking at you as my brother, and you're going about as if nothing has happened, then that causes contention. It just means that you as my brother is grieving in a different way. So we need to be able to help each other to grieve in the way that they can grieve, rather than making it a stumbling block.
All right.
So to answer the question, you don't have to cry. Some people, tears is not their first method of expressing their emotion. And so that's not where they may start. But we can also feel guilty about that. Yeah. Well, why am I not crying? Jane over there is crying. Paul over there is crying. Why am I not crying? And then there's guilt that can be built up on that.
That's right. We have two excellent questions. This is from our original team leader, Pastor Daniel. As a society, do we lack or not prepare for the loss of death, or I guess the eventuality of death? As a result, unnecessarily grieve due to unpreparedness. And then it says, should we prepare our family for this uncertainty, emotionally, financially, and socially? I want to thank Pastor Daniel for this. It's so important. One thing I learned, in ministry is basically when a senior pastor said to me, he said, Julian, part of our job is to prepare people for dying. It sounded, at that time, I was very young, it was like, but it's very important. Mm-hmm. Well, how would you address that?
I think this then can break off into cultural normal, cultural mode of grieving. But as even here in this country, grief is pretty much still a taboo. So we don't talk about it. We don't talk freely about it. And you're quite right, in preparation, that is pretty much a part of life. It's painful, I know, but nevertheless, it's pretty much a part of life. So we ought to be talking about it more. We ought to be expressing the emotions that we have more. We ought to be more trusting in terms of how we share our grief. Right now, the whole world collectively is grieving. In our churches, collectively, our churches are grieving. But I agree with pastors that we need to prepare. When was the last time you heard a discussion in church about death and dying? We don't talk about them. So people are not prepared. People are not prepared for when that time comes. And that can then impact on the journey that you take through grief.
A good friend of mine, Brother Leroy, he asks, if someone appears to not be grieving after the death of a loved one, how can we help? Or should we try to help? Now, I just wanted to, before you will answer this much better, I just wanted to very briefly share a very short 1-minute reflection, if you allow me, because this is a very important question, but I'm putting my pastoral perspective on it. It's just, this is like I share from the heart. We need to be very, very sensitive when we talk to people, because, that comes to me somehow. I was thinking tonight that we do not want to be like Job's friends. Job in the Bible. It's a very typical example of grieving. They are called pseudo-comforters, or fake comforters. They drove him mad with questions, coming with wrong conclusions, wrong assumptions about his grief. Too often we end up, a 21st century, I guess their names were Bildad, Eliphaz, or Zophar. So we feel that uncomfortable silence with words that wound rather than heal. So, and this is sometimes it's sad to realize this, but, when I judge I'm not a good griever, when I judge you, I judge myself as well. So, it's important, I think, to remember to be grateful for, what people have left until they have had a chance to mourn what they've lost. It will take longer than what you and I think it's reasonable, or rational, or even right. But that should be okay. True friends are not like Job's friends. They take their time. I just wanted to share that reflection. Go ahead, please, Leebert.
Yeah, there are some very important people in our lives that we exclude from death and dying. That's our children. We don't include them in that. Some people will not let their children go to the graveside.
Yeah.
But what I have to remind people is that though they are only a smaller version of us, they still have the same emotions. They don't have the tools to deal with those emotions, and we need to be able to help them to develop in a way, linking with what Pastor has just said, to develop in a way that they can become more adept at managing losses. So I didn't want to finish this without sort of highlight the fact that we need to value or include our children in the way they grieve, help them to grieve rather than leave them on one side.
I appreciate very much you highlighting the children. Really, really appreciate it. While we know our loved ones may die one day, why are we unable to accept the reality of death? You were talking earlier, how even sometimes, even in the church, we treat it as a taboo subject.
I think that may vary, again, even culturally. Some cultures, when somebody dies, it's a huge celebration. They're celebrating the life that that person has lived. From the Christian point of view, we are to be learning to be able to worship God, to give God thanks, to show gratitude, even in the midst of death. Because otherwise, if we're not able to do that, our faith may crumble, our belief in God may crumble. And some of the questions that we may then ask could even push us further down into grief. Some cultures deal better with grief than others. And those are the ones that tend to be more open about grief, as opposed to the ones that tend to be more closed.
We have it's a practical question. It says, in relation to the current question, how I think it was earlier when I think Pastor Daniel pointed out excellently about preparation, for that moment. How should I prepare financially? What age should I get a will?
Oh, it's an interesting question.
It's an interesting, it's a valid question, and I'm very thankful for that question.
I think that's going to be down to your circumstances. It's going to be down to whether or not you feel that you're at a point in your life whereby you need to begin to make preparation for maybe for when you're not here. So that's a more personal thing. I couldn't put a particular age, because some people may do that in their 40s, some people may do that in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I don't think I have a definitive answer to that one. Did you have a question from Leroy? I think I heard.
Yeah. So basically, if someone appears to not be grieving.
Okay.
Yeah. After their loved one has passed away. So how can we help? How should we try to help?
Just be there for them. Be there for them. They may still be trying to work out what they need to do. All we can do is support them in that process. We can't force them to start that process. And that's not to say because they're not openly grieving that they are not. They don't know what's happening inside. So it's to get as close as you can to that person, try and understand what may be happening for them. Because they may just need somebody to help to draw that out of them.
This is the last question from the panel, and it's a really good one. One of our esteemed participants tonight, he or she, they're asking, I'm struggling. I'm not a Christian. So is there no hope for me? You know, I'm so thankful for that question, and I appreciate that. And I also, appreciated how you, during your presentation, have mentioned, both situations where someone is a member of the Christian faith or a practicing Christian or not. But this is, so.
Yeah, I think it's the same things apply. That person needs to acknowledge loss. They need to be able to talk about what they're experiencing. So you don't have to be a Christian to do that. I guess the added advantage that the Christian may have is that sometimes you may be almost on the same hymn sheet, but for somebody that is not a Christian, the process is still the same. Yeah, so it's about the talking, it's about not isolating yourself, it's about taking care of yourself, it's about making sure you eat well, it's about making sure you get enough sleep, it's making sure you get enough rest, making sure you get enough fresh air, so going outside rather than just staying inside.
I just wanted to add something to that person, and God loves everybody, but it's perfectly understandable why people come in, they have different convictions in their life about God and so on and so forth. But hope everyone is entitled to hope. Hope is there as a blessing for everyone, irrespective of whether they believe or are members of a particular church or denomination or this or that. So I would encourage that person. But how wonderful, and I think this is a wonderful step, that person is with us tonight, taking part in this. And we are a community, we're an umbrella. I always think also of the churches we represent here as big umbrellas for everyone. Everyone who needs to come there. We are not in the business of judging, which fits very well, of course, with the grief. Now we have another question. Actually, questions keep coming up. If someone who had a loss and preferred to be alone, some people just prefer to be left alone. Should we leave them alone or be worried, concerned about them?
We need to respect their position, but we also need to keep an eye on them. So if this person is just going to isolate over time, just isolate themselves, we need to try and break that cycle. There are times when, yes, that person may need to be alone with their thoughts and do what they need to do. As a responsible supporter of that person, if we see that it's 12 o'clock in the day, but the curtains are still closed, we're not seeing them coming out for walks, we need to take some action. And it might be that you may just gently ask them to come on a walk with you. You may just gently ask them to do something for you, help you do something, just to get them to have a change in their focus, where their focus is. So don't just leave them. Keep an eye on them, although they may request it. But if you come to a point whereby you feel this is getting beyond this person just wanting to be by themselves, then we need to try and have some intervention.
Thank you so much. We will close the questions there. We have Dr. Wimby has written in the chat, I think it's in practical advice, make a will for yourself. Talking about the question about making a will. Whenever you get grown up enough to have your own property and / or a bank account. Thank you, Dr. Wimby. That's practical advice. It's much appreciated. Like we said, there is no taboos on this, and we need to encourage talking about this. So I want to thank you very much. I want to ask you for some. Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
I just want to end with one final slide, if that's okay.
Yes, please. I was just going to. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Sharing the screen. Where is it? Right, for those of you that are listening in, if this conversation has sort of brought up anything for you, what I would encourage you to do is to speak to your GP. Locally, there is the Village of Hope befriending service. They're just starting up, but if you need some help, you can do that. They will advise you. The North England Conference has a counseling service. You can tap into that. Cornerstone, which is the SEC, South England Conference, also has a counseling service, and the numbers are there for you. Again, locally, and in our area here, there is a counseling service. That is a service to also respect the Christian aspect of therapy, or a trusted person. Don't feel you have to do this on your own. Help and support is available.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've run out a little bit of time, but given the sensitivity of the subject, I allowed this to go a little bit over time, but I think we have everyone's understanding on it. So again, from my end, it was a privilege to have been the moderator for tonight. And this program will be there. It's accessible on YouTube. We want to encourage everyone to take part in these very, very useful, really life-transforming seminars. I've taken with me many, many things. Just one last final thought. Jesus himself, when he heard about that one of his closest friends had passed away, Lazarus, he allowed for grief to take place. He grieved himself. And I find that very comforting, to see that the Jesus of Nazareth, who could have changed things from a distance, he allowed that process. It's, as we said, it's one of the most human experiences that we will experience in this life. And, we need to allow grief to be grief, and we need to go through that process. And, but please remember, dear friends, that people grieve differently. And, remember to be tactful and to show tact and sensitive when you talk to others. And so to be true friends. Thank you again from my end. So we'll pass on to our organizers. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking Leebert Hughes this evening for his presentation, and also Pastor Julian Castrati for moderating our meeting. So we appreciate you giving your time and also sharing your expertise in this area. Now, next week, we'll be looking at the early detection of cancer. Now, you may have seen numerous adverts on the television, on TV, and the current one that I've seen is if you have a cough for 3 weeks, a continuing cough for 3 weeks, then the advice is that you go and see your GP. Now, we have Dr. Andrew Baildon with us next week as our presenter, and he is a very experienced doctor, and he'll be sharing with us the signs to look for in our bodies and how our bodies are reacting in terms of detecting cancer in its signs of cancer in its early stage. So please again join us next week at 7 p.m. We encourage you again to invite family and friends to join us at 7 o'clock, and thank you once again for joining us this evening. Bye for now.